I'm Craig Sams, and this is Judge's Bakery behind me, which we've been running for 4 years, and which is kind of the successor of Sarah's Bakery, which was the bakery that we had on Portobello Road from 1972 onwards. And this bread is our wholemeal sourdough bread, and it's made with whole wheat flour, sesame seeds, flax seeds, and hemp nuts, and seaweed. And it's based in principle on Lima bread, which was developed by one of the Gavart brothers, Omar, the brother of Mimi Gavart, who gave me the recipe for Nomato. And Omar was the first person in Europe to make rice cakes. And I remember him making them one at a time. Every 15 seconds there'd be a bang, and another rice cake would pop out of individual machines. That's all been mechanized since then. Huge factories that sound like machine guns instead. He gave a speech at the 1982 Hanover Sourdough Bakers Conference in Germany, in Hanover, and was booed by the German sourdough bakers, who thought he was a stupid Belgian because he said that the enzyme must dominate the yeast. In other words, that sourdough yeasts aren't enough. You have to create enzyme action through the germination of wheat that releases the enzymes that then break the proteins, the long gluten proteins in wheat, down to a more digestible form, and overcome one of the problems people have with wheat, which is the stickiness of gluten. In fact, he was absolutely right. We've mirrored his practice with this bread, and it's arguably the best bread in the world. Interestingly, even people who have developed wheat allergy or gluten allergy find it possible to eat this bread, and we ship a lot of it to people in London from time to time.
So you're planning to expand your bakery?
We are working with a bakery in London, we're training them to produce bread to our recipes and procedures, and we will then be able to supply Judge's Bakery bread to outlets in the London area.
So when would that be?
It should be by July or August of 2009.
Okay, that's great. So what is the kind of history of bread in this country, and why is sourdough bread the best bread?
Well, historically, bread was made with naturally, every bakery would have its own culture, much as every winemaker still has his own yeast. And they would keep what was called a barm tub, where they would throw scrap pieces of dough and it would ferment away, and then they just put a ladle in, scoop this liquid into the doughs, and that would initiate the fermentation. But the bakers would make their dough the last thing before they went home. Even with traditional yeasted breads, they would have big troughs, they'd mix their doughs by hand, and then they'd go home. And they used tiny, tiny amounts of yeast, less than 2 ounces to 70 pounds of flour, which is it's 1/16 of 70. 16 times 70, it's about 1,000th of the dough was actually yeast. But then they left it for 18 hours, so it gave a nice, long, slow, gentle fermentation in which enzyme action also could happen. Then people started doing what was called short time doughs, and they cut that down to 3 hours, and the bakers would come in the morning and make it. Modern bread, the yeast is, they use 2 to 4 kilos of yeast, so it's like about 8% yeast. They throw in ascorbic acid, they whiz it up in a high-speed blender, drop it into the bread pans, and push it straight in the oven. So there's no fermentation, no knocking back the dough, no secondary fermentation, and the bread rises in the oven. It's full of yeast, and since that process was introduced in the 1960s, the incidence of celiac disease, irritable bowel syndrome, wheat allergy, gluten intolerance has skyrocketed. 2 and 2 usually makes 4, but nobody really wants to admit that that's the cause of the population of countries like the United States and Britain, whose heritage has been eating wheat since about the 7th or 8th millennium BC, are suddenly, in one generation, intolerant and allergic to wheat? I don't think so. It has to be what we're doing with the wheat, not the wheat itself.
So what do you think the bread industry, what would you like to see the bread industry do with the bread?
I think
Make it more healthier?
The bread industry is coming round very slowly, but they've invested hugely in these highly mechanized processes. As long as you pay 19 pence or 50 pence for a loaf of bread, you're going to get what you pay for. And it's like anything that's really cheap. Ultimately, the real price you pay is with your health, not with your pocketbook.
Well, would you like to do what you did with chocolate, but with bread?
We think we are, and in fact, my wife Jo, who co-founded Green and Blacks with me, says bread is the new chocolate. People are waking up to what bread should be like, and we're there, and lots of other artisan bakers are there. I don't think it's the same in the sense that you can't mass produce that sort of quality of bread. It needs to be done on an artisanal scale. But so what? It's bread.
So would you be happy to talk to the bread makers to kind of get this bread becoming popular, to make it workable so more and more people can have this kind of bread?
I think that what I would like to see is bakeries reappearing. They were all going out of business in the early 70s when I started Sarah's Bakery. There are now artisan bakeries popping up everywhere. We get people who come and work with us for a month or 2 months so that they can go off and open their own bakery. And I think that is the future.
So could you see these bakeries open up like in Tesco's and Marks and Spencer's?
Yeah, but they're still dependent on pre-made. They make the bread by the fast process, then they part bake it, and then they bake it off in the store. It's not the same as baking bread.
Yeah, but if they were interested, would it be something that you could see in the store?
Yeah, I'm sure they could do it in some way. But once the most expensive ingredient in a loaf of bread is time.
Right.
Time is money. Supermarkets are trying to reduce the cost of everything in order to maximize the profit. And at the end of the day, a small baker producing high-quality bread can compete with the big industrial bakers if you use quality as your platform.
So what would you say to someone who's new, who's trying this bread, to pay a little bit extra for it?
I would say, how much do you spend on a pint of beer, or a cappuccino, or a cup of tea at Starbucks? It's whatever you pay. It's less. It's more than the price of a good loaf of bread. You know, with all the things you save money on, bread should not be the one. You know, if you want to have something that's second rate, get a second-hand iPod. But, you know, the way people spend money to indulge themselves on a psychological level, and then they get that money by punishing themselves on a physiological level, is crazy.
So you think bread is a good investment in life?
Bread is the foundation of the Western diet, and could continue to be. I mean, it's what I eat. I've been brown rice and bread between them are at least 50% of my diet. And then I eat anything else.
So it's a good way to get the whole grain into your diet.
Absolutely. And with all the other stuff in a bread like this, the flax seeds, the hemp nuts, and the sesame and the seaweed, you're getting all the other desirables in a very accessible, easy, and transportable way.
It's great for kids to get all this goodness.
Yeah, kids love it. You know, it's quite interesting. The kids take a loaf of bread like this, and they push away the white bread.
Yeah,
because it's more interesting.
So it's a good way to get seaweed into kids, you know, and they don't realise it's in there.
Well, if you look at the Nomato the ingredient list, or most of my whole earth products, we always put seaweed in everything.
Yeah.
We put them in baked beans, we put it in the pasta sauces. It's just, if you can put kelp powder into something, I think you should. You know, just because people don't know how to cook wakame and tzatziki, but we all suffer from iodine deficiency to some extent.